The night started like any other at Crossroads Bar, until they decided she didn't belong. They mocked her limp. They shoved her outside. Nobody stood up. Nobody helped. What these bullies didn't know was who they were messing with, or who would answer her call. When 120 Hells Angels surrounded the bar an hour later, the atmosphere shifted from mockery to fear. The ground literally shook as they arrived in formation, their leader stepping forward with a presence that silenced the room. What happened next left everyone reaching for their phones. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to see more powerful stories of justice and unexpected alliances. The Crossroads Bar and Grill hummed with weekend energy, that perfect mix of local regulars and summer tourists that kept Meridian Bay's economy alive. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling, catching in the condensation of cold glasses and the occasional wedding ring. A local band played covers just loud enough to justify leaning in close for conversation. Brielle Winters paused at the entrance, taking in the room with a single sweep. Exits, crowd density, mood. Old habits. Her jeans concealed most of her prosthetic, though her measured gait betrayed something different about her movement. Nothing else did. At 38, she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need announcing. The usual Brielle? Thackeray called from behind the bar, already reaching for the top-shelf whiskey he reserved for certain customers. She nodded, sliding onto a corner stool that offered a view of both the door and the mirror behind the liquor bottles. Just one tonight. Solstice is at her friend's, but I'm on call. As Thackeray placed the drink before her, his eyes carried a familiar respect. He'd never asked about the prosthetic or the scars visible when her sleeves rode up. Didn't need to. 3 drinks down the bar, Decker Holloway's laughter cut through the music. The local real estate developer had his arm around someone half his age, holding court among his usual entourage. His company sponsored half the town's events, a fact he never let anyone forget. "Hey, Ice Queen," he called out, noticing Brielle's reflection in the mirror. "Too good to say hello to the neighbors?" Brielle turned slightly, offering a polite nod before returning to her drink and the text from Solstice. "Movie running late, home by 11. Love you." "See that?" Decker stage whispered to his group. "That's what I'm talking about. Some people think they're above being friendly." Thackeray set another glass down with unnecessary force. "Decker, how about another round for your friends? On me." But Decker's attention had locked onto Brielle now, particularly as she stood to visit the restroom. Her slight limp became more pronounced after sitting. Well, he muttered, eyes narrowing. "Looks like someone's a bit broken." Brielle felt the shift in attention as she made her way across the room. The bar wasn't large, but tonight it felt expansive, the distance to the restroom stretching with each step. She'd grown accustomed to the occasional glances at her gait, the subtle double takes that people thought she didn't notice. Usually they were fleeting, followed by averted eyes and awkward politeness. Decker's stare was different. It followed her with deliberate interest, the kind that never preceded anything good. In the restroom, Brielle took a moment, not out of necessity, but strategy. Years of training had taught her to recognize potential escalations before they happened. The muscles in her shoulders tensed as she washed her hands, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. The face looking back had weathered things Decker and his friends couldn't imagine. When she returned, Decker had relocated his group closer to her corner. Their jokes grew louder, with pointed references to damaged goods and factory defects. She checked her watch, left cash under her barely touched drink, and moved to leave. Decker stepped directly into her path. "What's your problem anyway? Too important to socialize with the people who pay taxes in this town?" His breath carried the sour note of someone 5 drinks in. The bar's ambient noise dropped as conversations paused. Someone's phone camera light switched on. "No problem," Brielle replied, her voice measured. "Just heading home." "Oh, I get it." Decker's smile spread wide. "You think you're special?" He looked around for audience approval. "We're not good enough for you?" When she attempted to step around him, his hand shot out, gripping her arm. What happened next was so quick most missed it. A reflexive countermove that Brielle stopped herself from completing, forcing her body to go slack instead. Thackeray moved quickly around the bar. "Decker, that's enough. You don't know who she—" "I know exactly who she is," Decker cut him off. "Someone who thinks her broken parts make her interesting." He dramatically imitated her walk, drawing reluctant laughs from his friends. When Briel's expression remained unchanged, something in Decker's eyes hardened. He placed both hands on her shoulders and shoved. If you can't handle normal people, maybe you shouldn't be in public. The force sent Briel stumbling backward through the door, her prosthetic catching awkwardly on the threshold. She maintained her balance, but couldn't maintain the dignity the moment stole from her. Inside, no one moved. Some looked away, some whispered disapproval, others filmed. No one stood. The night air carried a chill that hadn't been present when Briel arrived. She took a deep breath, the kind she'd learned to take in moments when everything inside her wanted to react with the training that had been burned into her muscles and reflexes. It would be so easy. Too easy. Instead, she straightened her jacket, pulled out her phone, and made a call. When it connected, she spoke only 5 words. Crossroads. Now. It's happening again. She ended the call without waiting for a response. She knew there would be one. Leaning against the brick wall outside the bar, Briel surveyed the quiet street. Meridian Bay was a tourist town, but Tuesday nights in the off-season meant mostly locals. A few couples strolled past, giving her curious glances but no assistance. The evening had acquired that peculiar quality she recognized from operations, time stretching out, each minute feeling both endless and insufficient. The door to the crossroads opened, spilling light and laughter onto the sidewalk. A young couple emerged, the woman glancing at Briel with momentary concern before her companion pulled her along. Behind them, Decker's voice boomed from inside, recounting his version of events to appreciative chuckles. Briel felt the familiar weight of her choices. She could leave now, return home to Solstice, and let the night fade into another entry in the long ledger of indignities she'd endured since coming back changed from that final deployment. It would be the sensible option. But tonight felt different. Perhaps it was the text from Solstice earlier. "Mom, we learned about Afghanistan in history class today. Were you ever there?" Or perhaps it was simply that she'd reached her limit of quietly absorbing the Deckers of the world. She had left her jacket inside, an expensive one, a gift from her unit after her discharge. She would need to retrieve it. As she prepared to re-enter the bar, her phone vibrated with a text. Coordinates confirmed. ETA 27 minutes. Stand by. For the first time that evening, Briel allowed herself a small smile. Inside the crossroads, the atmosphere had evolved. Decker now occupied her former seat, holding court as if he'd won some significant victory. The crowd around him had grown, drawn by the promise of drama and the peculiar magnetism of his confidence. Thackeray worked the bar with tight movements, his earlier friendliness replaced by professional efficiency. Briel moved through the space differently now, no longer trying to minimize her presence. She walked directly to Decker's group. "My jacket," she said simply. "I left it on the stool." Decker turned slowly, his surprise at her return quickly masked by amusement. "Well, look who came crawling back." He lifted the jacket from where it had been stuffed beneath the bar. "This old thing? I thought it was trash someone left behind." She extended her hand, palm up, waiting. Something in her steady gaze made Decker uncomfortable. He tossed the jacket toward her, intentionally short so it landed on the sticky floor between them. "Oops," he said with exaggerated concern. "Guess you'll have to bend over for it. Can you even do that with your, you know?" He gestured vaguely at her leg. A few of his friends laughed, but others shifted uncomfortably, sensing a line being crossed. Briel looked at the jacket, then at Decker, then at the room full of people watching the interaction unfold. Not a single one made a move to help. This was the moment that had repeated throughout her life since returning, the test of what kind of person she would choose to be in a world that often mistook kindness for weakness. She had faced this choice in combat zones, in rehabilitation centers, and now in this small-town bar where the enemy wasn't holding a weapon but wielded something just as damaging. She bent slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled as she retrieved her jacket. When she straightened, her eyes met Decker's with a calm that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. 20 minutes, she said quietly. "What?" Decker's smirk faltered. "Nothing." She turned to leave, but not before looking at each silent face in the room. "Remember this moment," she added, addressing no one and everyone. "When you had a choice." Outside again, Briel checked her watch. The timing would be close. She considered waiting in her car but decided against it. She wanted to be visible when they arrived. She wanted Decker and his friends to see her standing there, unbowed, when the response to their cruelty appeared on the horizon. She didn't have to wait long. The first rumble was distant but unmistakable to anyone who knew the sound. The distinctive percussion of Harley-Davidson engines moving in formation. One, then many, growing louder with each passing moment. Across the street, a couple paused their evening walk, turning toward the approaching sound. Inside the crossroads, conversations continued, oblivious to what was coming. Brielle positioned herself directly under the streetlight, making sure she would be immediately visible. The first headlight appeared around the corner, followed rapidly by another, then dozens more. The lead rider, a massive silhouette on an even more imposing machine, raised one gloved hand, and the formation began to execute a maneuver that spoke of military precision rather than casual riding. Within minutes, the street had transformed from quiet to controlled chaos as 120 motorcycles surrounded the Crossroads bar and grill in concentric rings. Their engines cut simultaneously, leaving a silence more absolute than any natural quiet. The lead rider dismounted, removing his helmet to reveal a face that had seen too much war and somehow found peace anyway. Tiernan Blackwood stood 6'4" with shoulders that strained the leather of his vest, but it was his eyes that commanded attention, clear, focused, and fixed directly on Brielle. The door to the Crossroads opened as curious patrons spilled out to investigate the commotion. Decker pushed his way to the front, his earlier confidence evaporating as he took in the scene. Tiernan crossed the distance to Brielle in 4 long strides. Without a word, he embraced her with the careful respect reserved for those who have shared battlefield bonds. When they separated, he examined her face with the assessment of someone trained to recognize injuries. "Status report, Commander?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough for the gathering crowd to hear the title. "Intact," Brielle replied with the ghost of a smile. "But I believe some education is in order." Tiernan nodded, turning toward the bar's entrance where Decker stood frozen, suddenly understanding that the woman he'd humiliated was connected to forces he hadn't calculated. "Then let's begin," Tiernan said, gesturing toward the door. "After you, Commander Winters." The crowd parted instinctively as Brielle and Tiernan approached the entrance to the Crossroads. People pressed themselves against walls and tables, their expressions a mixture of confusion and apprehension. The music had stopped, leaving only the murmur of bewildered whispers and the heavy tread of Tiernan's boots on the wooden floor. Decker backed up as they approached, nearly stumbling over a chair in his retreat. His friends, so boisterous earlier, had dispersed to the edges of the room, trying to blend into the background. The power shift was palpable, a current in the air that everyone could feel but few understood. Brielle entered the bar with her head high, her posture transformed. Gone was the woman who had tried to minimize her presence earlier. In her place stood someone accustomed to command, to respect earned rather than demanded. Beside her, Tiernan moved with the contained power of a predator who rarely needed to display his strength. "Lieutenant Commander Winters," he said, his voice carrying the gravel of someone who'd inhaled too much smoke in too many burning buildings. "Ghost Team 6, Kandahar, 2017. The words hung in the air like artillery smoke. For those watching, something changed in Brielle's posture, a subtle shift from civilian to something else entirely. Her shoulders squared, chin lifting almost imperceptibly. "Chief," she acknowledged with the barest nod. The moment fractured as images surfaced in both their minds, fragmentary glimpses of another life. Brielle in tactical gear leading a unit through mountain terrain. A night extraction operation gone sideways. Tiernan's younger self, trapped under burning wreckage after an IED explosion. Brielle, despite already grievously wounded, dragging him to safety as gunfire erupted around them. Her leg mangled beyond repair, as medics worked frantically aboard a helicopter. Tiernan turned to face the bar, his voice projecting without shouting. "This woman has more courage in her prosthetic than most have in their entire bodies." He gestured toward the door. "Half the men outside owe their lives to operations she led. Missions you'll never read about, because people like her ensure people like you get to remain ignorant of what keeps you safe." His eyes found Decker, who had shrunk visibly into his seat. "You put hands on a decorated Navy SEAL, someone who sacrificed parts of herself so you could feel big in your small town. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only when Thackeray set a glass down on the bar with deliberate care. "I told you," he said to Decker, his voice quiet but distinct. "I tried to tell you who she was." Decker's face had drained of color. His earlier bravado evaporated in the face of revelations he couldn't have anticipated. "I didn't know," he managed finally. "You shouldn't have needed to know," Tiernan replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Basic human decency doesn't require a service record check first." Brielle stepped forward, her focus not on Decker, but on the room at large. "The real problem wasn't him," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in much more chaotic environments than this. "It was everyone who watched and did nothing." The patrons shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with her and each other. Several phones were recording now, capturing a moment that would soon extend far beyond the walls of the crossroads. Outside, the sound of additional motorcycles arriving broke through the quiet. Through the windows, the crowd could see more Hells Angels forming a perimeter around the building, their bikes arranged with tactical precision that spoke to military backgrounds. Tiernan stepped toward Decker, who flinched despite the lack of overt threat in the bigger man's movement. "Stand up," Tiernan said simply. Decker rose unsteadily, his eyes darting between Brielle and the door, where silhouettes of dozens more riders were visible. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't know who she was." "That's the problem," Brielle spoke, her voice surprisingly gentle. "You shouldn't need to know someone's history to treat them with basic dignity." Tiernan nodded. "Mr. Holloway," he said, surprising Decker with the use of his name, "you have a choice to make. You can apologize to the commander for your behavior, or I promise you'll find your name and face shared with every chapter of our organization across the country." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We ride everywhere." The implication hung in the air. Decker's business relied on his reputation in communities up and down the coast. The thought of being unwelcome in any of them was clearly an unacceptable prospect. "I apologize," he said, the words directed at his shoes rather than at Brielle. "Try again," Tiernan suggested quietly, with sincerity this time. Decker looked up, meeting Brielle's steady gaze. Something shifted in his expression, perhaps the first genuine emotion he'd displayed all evening. "I am truly sorry, Commander Winters. My behavior was inexcusable. I hope you can forgive me." Brielle considered him for a long moment. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "What you do from here will determine whether it means anything." The tension in the room eased slightly, though no one moved. Tiernan looked at Thackeray. "I think this calls for a round, don't you?" Thackeray nodded, already reaching for glasses. "Drinks are on the house tonight for the commander and every veteran in the building." He looked pointedly at several regulars who he knew had served. "And maybe it's time we all remembered what courage actually looks like." As if released from a spell, the bar began to return to life. Conversations resumed, though muted and more reflective than before. Several patrons approached Brielle cautiously, offering handshakes and quiet words of respect. Others moved toward the door, either to witness the gathering outside or to make discreet exits. Brielle accepted the acknowledgments with grace but without elaboration. This wasn't about her seeking recognition. It never had been. She caught Tiernan watching her with a hint of a smile beneath his weathered exterior. "You always did know how to make an entrance, Chief," she said when he moved closer. "Learn from the best, Commander." His eyes held a question. "How long has this been happening?" Brielle shrugged slightly. "It's different here than in the city. Small towns have long memories for outsiders. And short memories for sacrifice," Tiernan added, his gaze sweeping the room. "Your daughter know about any of this?" "Solstice knows I served. She doesn't know the details." Brielle checked her watch. "Speaking of which, I should get home before she does." Tiernan's expression shifted to something softer. "She's here, actually." Arrived with the second group, Brielle's carefully maintained composure faltered for the first time. "What? How?" "She called Riley's daughter when she couldn't reach you. Riley recognized the address and put things together." Tiernan's smile was genuine now. "The kid's got your instincts." Before Brielle could respond, the door opened to admit a slender teenage girl with her mother's observant eyes and determined chin. Solstice Winters surveyed the room with the same sweeping assessment Brielle had used earlier, quickly locating her mother despite the crowd. "Mom," she called, moving forward. What's happening? The bar patron stepped aside, creating a path between mother and daughter. Something in their expressions had changed, respect replacing the earlier indifference or judgment. A few even nodded to Solstice as she passed, as if acknowledging her place in whatever story was unfolding. Brielle met her daughter halfway, placing her hands on Solstice's shoulders. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Mackenzie's." "I was," Solstice replied, her gaze moving between her mother and Tiernan. "Until you didn't answer your phone, and I got worried. So I called Mackenzie's mom, who called Mrs. Riley, who said something was happening at the crossroads and they were heading here." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who are all these people, Mom? And why did that man call you Commander?" The question hung between them, laden with all the careful omissions and simplified explanations Brielle had offered over the years. She glanced at Tiernan, who raised an eyebrow in silent communication. "Your call." "These are friends," Brielle said finally. "From before, from when I served." "All of them?" Solstice looked incredulous. "There are like 100 motorcycles outside." 123 at last count, Tiernan interjected, extending his hand to Solstice. "Tiernan Blackwood, I served under your mother in Afghanistan. She saved my life, along with most of my unit." Solstice's eyes widened. "Under her? But you said you were in logistics, Mom, support services." "She was supporting us, all right," Tiernan said, before Brielle could respond. "Supporting us right through enemy territory when our primary extraction went sideways." He gestured to his face, to the scar that ran from temple to jaw. "Got this when our transport hit an IED. Your mom pulled me out while taking fire, lost her leg making sure I didn't lose my life." Solstice turned to her mother, seeing her anew. "You never said." "There were a lot of things I never said," Brielle admitted. "Some because they were classified, some because they were difficult, most because they didn't matter to the life we were building here." "But they did matter," Solstice insisted. "They do matter. You matter." She glanced around the bar, at the people watching their exchange with various degrees of interest and shame. "What happened tonight? Why are they all here?" Brielle hesitated, unwilling to burden her daughter with the ugliness that had preceded this moment of truth. Tiernan had no such reservations. "Some folks needed a reminder about respect," he said simply. "Your mom called. We answered." Understanding dawned in Solstice's eyes, followed quickly by indignation. "Someone disrespected you? Here?" "It's been handled," Brielle assured her. "More than handled," Tiernan added with satisfaction. "I'd say the message has been received loud and clear." He looked around the room meaningfully, meeting the gaze of several patrons who quickly found their drinks fascinating. Outside, the motorcycle engines began to rumble to life, a rolling thunder that vibrated through the floorboards of the crossroads. Tiernan checked his phone. "The others are ready when you are, Commander. We've arranged an escort home for you and Solstice." Brielle nodded, her decision made. "I think it's time." As they moved toward the door, Thackeray called out from behind the bar, "Commander Winters." When she turned, he offered a crisp salute. "Thank you for your service. All of it." One by one, others in the room stood. Several veterans among them returned Thackeray's salute. The rest simply stood in respect, a belated acknowledgement of the woman they had failed to stand for earlier. Brielle accepted their gesture with a nod, neither seeking nor rejecting the recognition. She placed an arm around Solstice's shoulders and followed Tiernan toward the exit, toward the community that had answered when she called. Outside, the night had transformed. What had been a quiet street was now lined with motorcycles and riders, their formation creating a corridor that led from the crossroads door to where Tiernan's bike waited at the head of the assembly. The rumble of idling engines filled the air with a sound like distant thunder, a storm of respect gathering around one who had earned it many times over. Solstice stared in amazement. "All this for you?" "Not just for me," Brielle replied. "For what I represent. For what we all represent when we serve something larger than ourselves." Tiernan offered Brielle a helmet. "Your chariot awaits, Commander." Brielle accepted the helmet, weighing it in her hands like a relic from another life. The last time she'd ridden had been with Marcus, Solstice's father, before his final deployment, before everything changed. "I'm not sure I remember how," she admitted quietly to Tiernan. "Some things the body never forgets," he replied, his voice equally low. "Like swimming, like combat, like brotherhood." Solstice watched their exchange, absorbing this new dimension of her mother, a woman who apparently rode motorcycles with men who looked like they walked out of an action movie. "Are we really going to ride with them?" she asked, excitement overcoming her initial shock. Before Brielle could answer, a younger rider approached, offering a spare helmet to Solstice. "Axel Riley," he introduced himself. "My mom served with yours in the sandbox. I've got the safest bike in the convoy, promise." Solstice glanced at her mother for permission, receiving a nod after Brielle gave Axel a thorough assessment. The teenager accepted the helmet with barely contained enthusiasm. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk outside the crossroads, drawn by the unprecedented assembly of motorcycles. Among them stood Decker, his earlier swagger replaced by something approaching humility as he watched the scene unfold. "Commander," he called as Brielle prepared to mount behind Tiernan. When she turned, he stepped forward, extending his hand. "I meant what I said in there. I am truly sorry." Brielle regarded him for a moment, then accepted the handshake. "Actions matter more than words, Mr. Holloway. Remember that next time you encounter someone different from yourself." "I will," he promised, and something in his eyes suggested he might actually mean it. Tiernan started his bike, the powerful engine adding its voice to the chorus of thunder that filled the street. Brielle swung her leg over with practiced ease, muscle memory taking over despite the years and the prosthetic. Her arms wrapped around Tiernan's solid frame as he nodded to the riders at the front of the formation. As one, they began to move, a choreographed procession that spoke of discipline and unity. Solstice followed on Axel's bike, her initial nervousness giving way to wonder as they pulled away from the crossroads and onto Meridian Bay's main street. Word had spread quickly through the small town's network of texts and calls. Despite the late hour, people lined the sidewalks, watching the parade of motorcycles, with expressions ranging from confusion to awe. Some recognized Brielle, pointing and whispering as she passed. Others simply recorded the spectacle on their phones, capturing a moment that would soon extend far beyond Meridian Bay. The convoy moved at a deliberate pace, giving everyone a chance to witness what was happening. This wasn't just an escort home. It was a statement, a reclaiming of respect, a demonstration that behind Brielle's quiet presence lay connections and strength that the town had never suspected. As they approached the edge of town, Brielle leaned forward slightly. "This is too much, Chief. We're drawing a lot of attention." Tiernan's reply was immediate and firm. "That's exactly the point, Commander. Let them see, let them remember. Let them know that no one who served is ever truly alone." The formation continued onto the coastal highway, moonlight reflecting off chrome and leather as they curved along the shoreline. Brielle felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to release. The wind against her face, the rumble of the engine beneath her, the solid presence of an old comrade in front of her, and the knowledge that her daughter was experiencing a truth she'd kept hidden for too long. It all combined into a moment of unexpected freedom. They rode for 20 minutes, taking the scenic route to the modest house Brielle had purchased after her medical discharge. As they turned onto her quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the sound of dozens of motorcycles approaching in formation. Mrs. Eldridge, the retired school teacher who lived across the street and had never shown particular interest in the Winters family, stood on her porch in a bathrobe, mouth slightly open as the procession came to a halt in front of Brielle's house. Tiernan cut his engine, the others following suit until silence reclaimed the night. He dismounted first, offering Brielle his hand, with a formality that spoke of deep respect rather than assumption of need. Solstice arrived with Axel, removing her helmet to reveal flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "Mom, that was amazing. Why didn't you ever tell me you ride?" "There are a lot of things I never told you," Brielle replied, removing her own helmet and running a hand through her hair. "Some of them even involve motorcycles." The riders formed a loose semicircle around them, their presence transforming the ordinary suburban street into something extraordinary. Tiernan cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Commander Winters," he began formally, "on behalf of the men and women whose lives you've touched, I want to express our gratitude, not just for what you did in service, but for who you continue to be after it." Brielle shook her head slightly, uncomfortable, with the spotlight. "I was just doing my job, Chief, same as any of you would have done." "That's where you're wrong," Tiernan countered gently. "What you did went above and beyond. Taking shrapnel to drag me out of that burning transport wasn't in your job description. Continuing the mission with a leg that doctors later couldn't save wasn't protocol. Those were choices, the kind that define a person. He turned to Solstice. Your mother never told you these stories because true heroes rarely do. They carry the weight without complaint. They endure the stares and whispers without explanation. And they continue to serve in quiet ways long after the uniform comes off. Solstice moved to her mother's side, linking their arms with newfound appreciation in her eyes. I always knew you were strong, Mom. I just never knew how strong. Mrs. Eldridge had ventured closer during this exchange, along with several other neighbors drawn by the commotion. Brielle, she called uncertainly. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Mrs. Eldridge, Brielle assured her. Just some old friends visiting. The older woman's gaze traveled over the assembled riders, noting the military patches and insignia many displayed on their vests. Her expression shifted from concern to something resembling respect. I had no idea, she said simply. My Harold was in Vietnam. He never talked about it either. One by one, other neighbors approached, their initial wariness giving way to curiosity, and then understanding as the story began to circulate among them. The woman they had known as the quiet single mother who kept to herself was being revealed as something else entirely. A decorated veteran with connections that spanned far beyond their small coastal town. A young man from 2 doors down stepped forward hesitantly. Miss Winters? I'm enlisting next month. My mom said I should talk to you, but I never did because I didn't think you'd be interested. Brielle regarded him thoughtfully. Noah, right? Mrs. Patterson's son? He nodded, surprised she knew his name. I'm always interested in talking with those who choose to serve, she said. Stop by sometime. We can discuss what to expect. His face brightened visibly. Yes, ma'am? Thank you. Tiernan watched these interactions with satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd hoped would happen. Not just a moment of vindication for Brielle, but a reconnection to a community that had failed to see her true value. After a few more minutes of conversation, he signaled to the other riders. We should hit the road. Some of us have a long ride back to the city. The riders began to mount their bikes, preparing to depart, but not before each one approached Brielle to offer a handshake, a hug, or a simple nod of respect. The procession continued until a petite woman with steel gray hair cut in military precision stepped forward. Captain Riley, Brielle said, genuine warmth in her voice. I didn't realize you were here, too. Wouldn't have missed it, Riley replied, especially once my grandson called to say Solstice was looking for her mother. She turned to Solstice. Your mom and I served together for 3 tours. She never gave less than everything, never left anyone behind. Solstice absorbed this information, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Is that why you always check in on us? Why you bring casseroles when Mom has her bad days? Riley nodded. We take care of our own. Always have, always will. She looked at Brielle. Though some of us are better at accepting help than others, Brielle had the grace to look slightly abashed. Point taken, Captain. It's just Margaret now, Riley corrected with a smile. Same as you're just Brielle. The ranks were what we did, not who we are. Who we are goes much deeper than any title, Tiernan agreed, rejoining them after conferring with several riders. Speaking of which, we should document this gathering. It's not often we get this many of the old unit together in one place. Before anyone could object, phones appeared and an impromptu photo session began. Brielle found herself at the center of various combinations, with Tiernan and the original Ghost team, 6 members who had made the ride, with Riley and the women who had served alongside her, with riders who had only known her by reputation, but had answered the call nonetheless. Throughout it all, Solstice watched with growing understanding of the woman who had raised her, not just as a mother, but as a leader, a protector, a person of consequence in a world her daughter was only beginning to comprehend. As the final photos were taken, Tiernan approached Brielle one last time. This changes things, you know, he said quietly. For you here, I mean. I know, she acknowledged. That was the risk. No, he corrected. That was the point. You've been hiding too long, Commander, carrying too much alone. He gestured toward the neighbors who remained, talking among themselves with new awareness of the woman who had lived among them. They needed to see you, and maybe you needed to be seen. Brielle couldn't argue with his assessment. Already she could feel a shift, not just in how others perceived her, but in how she carried herself. Something had been reclaimed tonight that went beyond respect. The riders departed in smaller groups, the thunder of their engines gradually fading into the night. Eventually, only Tiernan's massive bike remained, its owner engaged in quiet conversation with Brielle on the front porch, while Solstice excitedly showed Mrs. Eldridge the photos on her phone. "Will you be all right?" Tiernan asked as he prepared to leave. "After all this attention, I mean." Brielle considered the question. "I think so. It's strange having people know, but maybe it's time. Solstice deserves to understand where she comes from, who her father was, who I am." "And who are you, Brielle Winters?" he asked with unexpected gentleness. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Still figuring that out, Chief. But tonight helped." He nodded, satisfied with her answer. "The network remains active. You need anything, day or night, you make the call. No hesitation." "I will," she promised, and they both knew she meant it this time. As Tiernan's motorcycle disappeared down the street, Brielle turned to find Solstice waiting for her at the door, her expression thoughtful. "You have a lot of explaining to do," the teenager said, but there was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "I do," Brielle agreed, "and I will. All of it." They entered the house together, leaving behind the ordinary street that had briefly transformed into something extraordinary. By morning, videos from the crossroads would begin circulating online. By afternoon, they would reach hundreds of thousands of viewers. By evening, millions would have witnessed the moment when 120 Hells Angels arrived to stand with a disabled veteran who had never asked for recognition but had earned it many times over. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, in a modest house in Meridian Bay, a mother and daughter began a conversation long overdue about service and sacrifice, about the visible and invisible wounds of war, about the networks of support that exist beneath the surface of ordinary lives. And in homes throughout the town, people who had known Brielle Winters only as the quiet woman with the prosthetic leg viewed her through new eyes, not with pity or indifference, but with the respect her silence had never demanded, but her actions had always deserved.